It's 2025, and Italy's economy is still smaller than it was before the 2008 financial crisis. Its population is shrinking, its youth are fleeing, and its debt is exploding. This isn't just decline. Italy is about to become Europe's biggest crisis. Italy's pension system is a ticking time bomb. The nation's generous welfare state now allocates over 16% of GDP to pensions, placing it second only to Greece in the OECD. This is a looming financial disaster. With a median age of 47, Italy boasts one of the oldest populations in the world. As old people live longer and Italians have fewer babies, their demographic imbalance threatens to topple their entire financial system. Its workforce is shrinking smaller and smaller, and by 2050, Italy could see more than 70 elderly individuals for every 100 working-age people. Elderly Italians will be forced to live on pensions that barely cover their living expenses, while the next generation sees no future in Italy and moves abroad. This brain drain, with approximately 50,000 young Italians leaving annually, accelerates the aging of Italy's population. And their Quota 100 early retirement scheme allows people to retire at 62 after contributing to the system for only 38 years. The Italian government must increase taxes or cut expenses. Both options, though, are politically unpalatable and extremely economically painful. Attempts at pension reform have been met with particularly fierce resistance from unions and the public. And the longer that these reforms are delayed, the more drastic and severe they're going to need to be. While Made in Italy once commanded respect globally, today it represents an economy stuck in the past. Iconic names like Gucci, Ferrari, and Barilla became synonymous with Italian ingenuity and style, dominating their respective industries and contributing significantly to Italy's economic prestige. At the heart of this economic renaissance was Italy's small and medium-sized enterprises. These agile, innovative companies became the backbone of the economy, accounting for over 99% of all businesses and employing 80% of the workforce. While countries like Germany focused on large-scale industrial production, Italy's success was built on a network of smaller, specialized firms. This model, known as flexible specialization, allowed Italy to excel in niche markets and quickly adapt to changing consumer demands. But in the background, Italy's political landscape was marred by chronic instability, with governments lasting an average of just 13 months since the founding of the Italian Republic. This revolving door of leadership made long-term economic planning functionally impossible. As early as the 1980s, the underlying weaknesses of the Italian economy began to become apparent. But to paper over the shortfall, leader after leader ran budget deficits and racked up more and more debt, all the way to the 2000s.
2008 will be remembered as the worst year since 1929. We bid up houses too high, we borrowed too much money from foreigners to finance it, the banks became involved in risky loans, the economy is genuinely in crisis. George Bush's legacy to Barack Obama is a very, very difficult one.
Attention has now turned to Italy. Some fear with a debt of $2 trillion, a default by Italy could mean disaster for the European Union and trigger a new global recession.
The global financial meltdown finally exposed the deep-rooted vulnerabilities in Italy's economy, kicking off a multi-decade period of stagnation that continues to haunt the country to this day. Unlike other G7 nations that managed to recover, Italy's economic malaise has resulted in consistent unemployment rates around 10% and youth unemployment reaching as high as 30%. The crisis struck Italy's key industries like manufacturing, while the luxury goods sector saw sales decline. Tourism also experienced a sharp downturn. Italian banks found themselves burdened with non-performing loans, estimated at over 12% of their entire book. This toxic asset burden has severely impaired the banking system, creating a credit crunch that has stifled business growth and formation. In the years following 2008, Italy's productivity growth flatlined, falling behind other major European economies. As the productivity gap has widened, it's made it harder and harder for Italian companies to compete internationally. Since 2008, Germany's economy has grown 22%, France's is up 17%. Italy's is still 4% smaller than it was before the crisis. That's not a recession. That's a lost generation. While other European nations invested in new technologies and industries, Italy remained frozen in place, watching as its competitors pulled further ahead. Now, Italy's debt-to-GDP ratio has soared to 150%, the second highest in the European Union. This dwarfs the EU average of 88% and threatens not only Italy's economic future, but the stability of the entire Eurozone. The government finds itself allocating vast sums to servicing its debt rather than productive investments. Annual interest payments consume approximately 4.4% of Italy's GDP, amounting to nearly 90 billion euros. And Italy's Eurozone membership imposes significant constraints on its fiscal policies. The country is unable to independently manage its currency or implement measures like devaluation to alleviate its debt burden. Without significant reforms, Italy could face a financial crisis that poses systemic risk to the entire continent.
Se l'Europa decide, come ha deciso in questi anni, di demandare ad altri la sua difesa, l'Europa demanda a altri anche la sua libertà.
In 2023, France launched a new aircraft carrier. Germany announced a 100 billion euro military modernization. Meanwhile, Italy's navy still operates ships from the 1980s, and its air force relies on aging fighters that need constant maintenance. While France and Germany rush to strengthen their militaries against Russian threats, Italy's defense budget has languished at 1.5% of GDP for 3 decades, well below NATO's 2% requirement. The result? Critical equipment shortages, delayed modernization, and a military that looks increasingly hollow behind its impressive personnel numbers. Recent promises to reach NATO's 2% target by 2028 rightfully draw skepticism. Their debt-laden economy can barely maintain its existing capabilities, let alone fund the massive investments needed for modern warfare. While European allies developed advanced drone programs and cyber capabilities, Italy struggles to keep its basic systems operational. This military weakness coincides with mounting strategic pressures. Waves of migrants cross the Mediterranean daily, stretching Italy's naval patrols to a breaking point. The Mediterranean, once Mare Nostrum, to the Italians, our sea, increasingly is the domain of others. Turkish drones dominate the skies. Russian warships cruise past Italian ports. Chinese merchant fleets deliver goods to Chinese-owned terminals. Italy watches from the sidelines as other powers reshape its historic sphere of influence. As Europe faces its greatest security challenges since the Cold War, Italy increasingly looks like its soft underbelly. Now, if you were looking for a place to potentially fund some of these deficits, I'd direct you to a bustling street in Naples, where vendors discreetly pocket cash without issuing receipts, or to a construction site in Sicily, where workers toil without official contracts. This epitomizes Italy's shadow economy, a parallel world of undeclared transactions and informal employment that accounts for up to 25% of the nation's GDP. This underground sector, worth potentially hundreds of billions of euros, simultaneously props up and undermines Italy's economic future. In Naples' Forcella district, an estimated 8 out of 10 businesses operate completely off the books. No taxes, no regulations, no records. The impact of this hidden economy varies drastically across Italy. In the industrial north, it often manifests as tax evasion by otherwise legitimate businesses. In contrast, southern regions like Calabria and Sicily have a larger underground economy intertwined with organized crime. The tax evasion obviously costs the Italian government billions of euros annually, and that lost revenue limits investments into infrastructure and public services, contributing to the economic stagnation. While the shadow economy can absorb some of that unemployment that plagues Italy, it's more of a short-term solution. Workers in the informal sector lack access to training, technology, and capital that could enhance their skills and output. And as criminal organizations infiltrate different sectors, it distorts market dynamics and can create unfair competition. Cultural acceptance of these informal economic activities creates a substantial barrier to reform. Many Italians view it as a necessary evil, a means of survival in an overly bureaucratic system. And politicians, wary of alienating voters who depend on informal work, often shy away from implementing tough reforms. So the shadow economy will continue to thrive. And the only two ways out are for Italy to become a totalitarian surveillance state or a substantially less bureaucratic and regulated government. As Italy approaches the 2030s, the perfect storm of demographic, economic, and fiscal challenges loom on the horizon. At the heart of this impending crisis is the demographic time bomb. The country's birth rate has plummeted to a record low of 1.24 births per woman, far below the 2.1 needed for population stability. In 2023, Italy recorded less than 380,000 births, a historic low. As the population ages rapidly, with over 24% of Italians already over the age of 65, the country faces a future where its workforce will struggle to support an ever-growing number of retirees. This means that at some point in the next decade, Italy's pension system will break. Some folks suggest that Italy should adopt drastic measures, such as an Australian or Canadian-style immigration policy, to stabilize its population and workforce. But that would face significant cultural and political hurdles. And besides, both countries have seen it lead to an enormous housing bubble. Regardless of which path its leaders choose, Italy faces a bleak future.